to the Power of One. Today, we are going to have a very interesting and raw conversation about domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So, we'll get to know the difference between the two. But please understand when you're watching this show, no judgment, just extend love. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Tiffiney L. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Tiffiney, we are going to have this real conversation, and we're going to speak about sometimes we find ourselves in relationships
Mm-hmm.
that have us in compromising positions,
Yes.
and then some things occur,
Mm-hmm.
and then we may actually get back with the person we had a little bit of difficulty with. And we're gonna talk about that today.
Sure.
But tell the viewers a little bit about you
Sure.
and your relationship, where you went to school. And when I say the relationship we're going to actually talk about today.
Sure. So my name is Tiffiney L. I am the founder of the organization Positive, and Positive stemmed from the conversation that we're going to talk about. I am a survivor of intimate partner domestic violence. I was stabbed 7 times by the person I was in a relationship with back then. So this was 2005. So we're talking about some time ago. So I don't want us to misconstrue that. But what brought me here and what I've been doing, I've been speaking since 2006. And I've been speaking on that very thing that we're talking about, the issues that surround domestic violence from a survivor standpoint, those taboo conversations that people will not have or don't have because of that judgment, that stigma, that fear. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is that's what keeps the epidemic on the rise, because we don't have those conversations. You know, we're not in a space where survivors feel safe enough to tell you this is what I went through. Yes, we did reconcile after it happened because of that fear, that judgment. So I founded this organization, Positive, which is a play on the word positive and my name, Tiffiney. And from that, as you can see in the background, I also have TLH coaching. Through TLH coaching, I coach emerging and aspiring speakers on how to use their voice to tell their story. So when I began speaking, I had a lot of people, you know, who would just come to me and you tell this story in such a powerful way without shame, without, you know, fear. So I began coaching as a result of my story and founding the organization Positive.
So you were in a relationship with someone. How long were you in that relationship? Do you have children? And then what happened on that day that caused the violence?
Sure. So, and I'll tell you this. So one of the things about having a real and raw conversation, asking me what happened on that day. So this is where things get sticky with survivors. I can't explain to you. I can tell you how the day went, but I can't tell you what happened on that day that caused that person to do what he did. And, you know, as advocates, as allies, that's one of the things that we need to come to a point to understand. If you want to know why somebody did what they did, you got to ask them.
Right.
You got to ask them. So me on the other side of it, yes, this is somebody, you know, I live with. We were in a relationship for some time by then, about 4 or 5 years by then. And the day that it happened, well, let me back up. We had been on, I want to say rocky terms, but nothing that, you know, we talk about red flags and signs. There was nothing that happened leading up to me being stabbed 7 times that I would have said, oh, this is going to happen. So yes, this was somebody, you know, raised in a family with, in a relationship with. And on that particular day, to be honest with you, like I said, I can't explain to you why he did what he did. And I would never try to explain to you, you know, why somebody as an adult made the decision that they did. What I can say is, as a survivor of domestic violence and on the other side of it, my responsibility now, you know, I'm almost 20 years out of this, you know, I'm married. I've been married to someone else for 10 years, amazing relationship, is having the courage to talk about it.
Right.
Having the courage. At that time, I went to an organization for help.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to that organization for help, that judgment, again, we reconciled, which is common in domestic violence relationships. Before a person leaves that final time, it is common. And we don't talk about that. Go ahead. Sure.
Let me go back for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
When I say like what happened that day,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to use language that we are going to be very sensitive to any domestic violence victim or IPV victim. And when I say what happened that day, not of what the person did, say you, the victim, because oftentimes there are victims of domestic violence and IPV where they actually think it's their fault.
So yes. So that was me after. I never thought it was my fault. And that's what I'm saying. So that's why my story is so crucial in the conversation, because what I say to a survivor on the other side, what I'm saying to a victim on the other side of it, I'm not going to take your power away from you. I don't care what happened. It is never your fault.
That's right.
It is never your fault. I never for one iota of a second took responsibility for this man picking up a knife and stabbing me.
Right.
Because there's nothing that I could have done that would have made someone do that. On that day, I went to class. I was in nursing
school. After the incident happened?
Before it happened.
Okay.
Before it happened, I went to class. I came home from class. I had another class that afternoon, and it happened in between that time. So again, I can't say on that day, particularly what sparked in his mind. I have not a clue.
Right.
I have not a clue. I want to say it was meant to happen to me, however that appears. It was meant to happen to me, to have this voice now and to be able, to have this conversation with you and get the message out there to survivors. It's not your fault.
Right.
It's not, there's nothing that you can do as a victim that justifies somebody putting their hands on you, somebody emotionally abusing you, physically abusing you, financially abusing you. There is nothing that justifies that.
Right. Now, the incident occurred. Of course, you received medical treatment. He was locked up. Now, was there a struggle with that he turned himself in? How much time did he do?
He turned himself in. Yes, he did turn himself in. And there ended up being, it was almost a year before he ended up being sentenced to, because he did jail time. And again, I'll say this. We have to understand, relationship or not, people have to be held accountable for their actions.
Right.
So even though, this was a person at that time I loved, I was in a relationship with, I still knew he hurt me. And there was nothing that, I would have said or done. Like, I wasn't crazy, despite what people may have thought. I was of sound mind. I had been in a situation I had never experienced in my life before. But I was of sound mind, and I would have never went before a judge and said, "Oh my God, please let him go. I love him." No, this man tried to take my life. Right. So, and people don't understand that. They're like, how can you at that time love someone who tried to kill you? The act and the person are two different things. This wasn't somebody who I would have thought, would have ever done something like that. And you can't automatically and immediately turn that love switch off. So, but he ended up being sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years. Yes. And what's ironic about it is the day of his sentencing. So I had a victim advocate through this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a victim advocate who, was my contact person, who kept me abreast of everything with the case, things that I needed to know. And I wasn't going to the sentencing. I didn't want to go to the sentencing. And I ended up going to the sentencing, and I read my victim impact statement. And there was, again, nothing in there that said, that spoke to his character, that there was nothing in there. And the judge said, I had spoke so eloquently. He said, you spoke so eloquently. He found it on his heart what his maximum was going to be, what his maximum was initially going to be his minimum. And the judge said, you spoke so he was sentenced to 2.5 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, the judge was going to have his minimum at the 5.
Okay.
But he said, you spoke so eloquently. And there was nothing in my victim impact statement that said, Judge, have mercy on him. Judge, we raised a family together. Nothing. It was just a matter of, that humanistic, that part that as humans, we just tend not to tap into, so looking back at it, it's again, it even amazes me as I think about the story.
I'm sure. Because you said it happened a while ago. So let's be clear about that. But that while ago technically was yesterday. You know what I mean?
Yesterday.
I'm sure in your mind when you think about that. Now, here's where the part comes in where judgment may have come in.
Sure.
Did you speak to him when he was in prison?
Mm-hmm.
And when he came out, you guys reunited again, correct?
Yes. So that is when he came home. That is when we reconciled. And the first time that I spoke to him after the incident happened, the very first time I spoke to him after the incident happened. And again, here we are, almost 20 years later, and I'm speaking about it more. Mm-hmm. I'm speaking about it more than I did then, because now, I'm almost 50 now, life experience, maturity. I can clarify and identify exactly what it is that I want to tell you about that experience. That judgment I can deal with. My shoulders are big enough to deal with it and navigate through it. Whereas then I just shrunk. I shrunk and I hid because, again, like you said, the judgment. So I say, well, you reconciled with him when he came home. Yes, I did. I did. And I can say why now. And I couldn't say that then, because there were advocates and there were people, and, you're depressed and, you're this and you're that. And I'm like, no, I'm human. I'm human. But the first time we spoke after it happened, that's why I say this was ironic that I use my voice. The first thing he told me, I recall, the first time we talked, he said, your voice sounds different. He said on that day, shortly before it happened, he said, your voice sounded demonic. Yes. He said, your voice sounded demonic. Like, as soon as the very first time he heard my voice, he said, your voice sounds different. And I stopped speaking for a while. Like, I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't say anything because I didn't know what it was about my voice that sounded different. Not saying that, he would do it again, but I didn't know what it was about my voice. Like, we never had a conversation that pinpointed that. And he just said, your voice sounded different. Yes.
So, and you don't have to go into detail.
Sure.
Did he ever apologize?
He always apologized. He always apologized. And one of the reasons that I'm able to do what it is that I do now so openly, not because of him, but he took responsibility for his actions. Like he never, whatever he was going to be sentenced to, in his mind, it was like, I hurt her.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, if this is the least of, my punishment, I deserve that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, on the victim side, you don't have, it's few and far between that victims have that.
Mm-hmm.
It's few and far between that victims are able to find solace in their perpetrator, in their abuser, taking responsibility for what they did, like wholeheartedly taking responsibility. So again, here we are, because that happened in my situation. I'm able to be a lot bolder in what it is that I say,
Right.
because my
Right.
experience allows me to say, as an abuser, if you take responsibility for your
Mm-hmm.
actions,
Mm-hmm.
you take a lot of that weight off of the victim.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to say to agencies, when abusers take responsibility, at one time, this was a person that you loved. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't just some fly by night person that you hurt. If that love meant anything to you,
Mm-hmm.
again, as an adult, spare them.
Mm-hmm.
Spare them. Everybody's not, they don't have the mental fortitude that, I had.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's not there. Everybody, doesn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Spare them.
Mm-hmm. Now, do
Spare
you firmly
them.
believe that once an abuser, always an abuser?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not.
Okay.
I believe that, no, I do. I do not. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that if you, in anything, I believe that if you do the work, and specifically him, like he's in another place in his life, so I don't, he's in another place in his life, and that's his life. But I don't believe that. I believe that if you take responsibility for your actions,
Mm-hmm.
if you're willing to do the necessary work, I do not believe that. And if you confront the issues, if you're honest with yourself about what brought you to that, I do believe that anybody has the ability to change anything.
Now, how long after him being released from prison did your relationship continue with him?
So he went to county jail for a month. So now he lived with me when it happened. We lived together when it happened. So when he was released from county jail, he came back to our house. And then he ended up going to, through his hearings and stuff, he ended up, when he went back to court, he went to state prison. When he went to state prison, he came home and we lived in separate spaces at that time.
Okay. But you were still in a relationship.
Yeah, we were still on and off. You know
Mm-hmm.
what's funny? Uh, I'm married. I've been married 10 years. And again, a little older with maturity. And I look back. Uh Defining it as a relationship is
Mm-hmm.
is is different to me now.
Okay.
It's so different to me now. I'm in a space in my life where anything other than you being married, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
What's
Mm-hmm.
what's the
Right.
title? And I can't definitively say to you what this relationship was.
Mm.
If I'm
Okay.
if I'm being like blatantly
You're right.
real, raw, and
Mm-hmm.
honest,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I can't say to you, yeah,
Exactly what it
you
was.
know, you know how it is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you dated somebody,
Mm-hmm.
y'all
Yeah.
did what y'all did. I can't say that, yeah,
You don't know what it was. At
yeah,
any
you know
point,
how it is. Like, I can't say,
right,
well, this is my boyfriend,
right,
because
right.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
He's
Like,
just he. This is
yeah,
just him.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
At any point, did you hate him?
I never hated him.
Okay.
I never hated him. I hated what he did.
Mm.
I never hated him. Yeah, I never hated him. Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, and I've been asked that, like, do you still love him? And I'm like, no, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, I can say that I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't hate him. No, I don't hate him. I don't.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I don't
Now here's
hate
another
it.
question, and you don't have to
Hmm.
answer this one if you do not
Sure,
want to.
sure.
I am sure that what happened on that day left some marks on your body.
Hmm.
Like when you see that, does that bring back that memory? Were you treated for your trauma? Because we
Hmm.
know how detrimental untreated trauma can be.
Right.
So do you see something daily that takes you back to that day?
I do not.
Okay.
Physically, no. I will
Mhm.
tell you this. I had so I don't know if you recall if you ever had one or if you know me explaining it. Like the wooden, like the knife blocks. They might have
Mhm.
had like,
Oh, yes.
knives
Mhm.
in them. So that's
Mhm.
actually what it was. It was like a knife block and it had six of them in it. And
Okay.
I recall like one of them was broken. So one of them wasn't in there. For the longest time, I wouldn't replace knives in like my house, like in a knife block. And I had purchased one and I would not put it on the counter.
Mm.
So, when you talk about triggers in that way,
Mhm. Mhm.
I would not put it on the counter. It sat in the basement and I lied to you not. I tell you, this was just in me being married that I actually put a knife block on our counter.
Wow.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
And because I know, in my mind, like I'm safe.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm safe. And in doing so, it allowed me to explore that aspect of it. Like I
Mhm.
don't think my husband's gonna do nothing like that. That's
Right.
the furthest thing. But when we talk about triggers and we talk
Mhm.
about trauma, I realized that that was that unaddressed
Exactly.
trauma,
Yeah.
like that unaddressed issue about that situation. And I'm a nurse, and I by trade, I'm a nurse. I have a license. I went to nursing school.
Okay.
So knowing that, I really had to deal with the mental part of it, the
Mhm.
wellness part of it,
Of course.
and have that conversation with myself. Girl, if you don't put these knives on this counter and stop.
Right.
Because
Right.
that's how I had to talk to me.
Mm.
Girl, if you don't stop,
Mhm.
why are you playing this mental game with yourself? You've come so far, you've done so many things. Like, what's going on here?
Mhm.
And it's allowed me, like you just said, to have that conversation. There are going to be some things that trigger us.
Right. Right. Mhm.
There are going to be some things that and it's not a trigger, but when I see it happens to another woman, I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, you need to say something else.
Right.
you
Right.
know oh, if you would have been out there in the marketplace, just sharing, it's not your fault. You
Mhm.
can leave. Don't be
Mhm.
afraid to leave. you
Mhm.
know and again, I can't say it wouldn't have happened. Whatever was supposed to happen was meant to
Happened.
happen. It was meant to happen. It was meant to happen.
Now you indicated you had an advocate.
Hmm.
So did you go seeking services, or the advocate was appointed to you because of what occurred? And how was that advocate? Was it strictly a domestic violence advocate? And was that advocate beneficial to you?
Sure, sure. So I had an advocate that walked me through the process. So that was one organization. So, and I spoke to her, and I openly, I told her, where I was at. And that, again, having an advocate who has gone through it is
Mhm.
different than having an advocate who has not a clue, and
Mhm.
it is a job.
Mhm.
When it
Mhm.
is a job, it's viewed totally different
True.
than from a standpoint of understanding.
Yes.
And my personality was so strong. Like, this is my experience. I'm living in the truth of it. I know what he did. I'm not crazy. I'm not deranged. I'm not depressed. I am able to make responsible decisions for me.
Right.
And if I would have saw something, that I thought was off, I would have definitely tapped into those resources that I had to
Mhm.
remove myself, remove him, all of that. So I
Right.
had an advocate with one organization that walked me through the legal process, and she stayed with me through the legal process.
Mhm.
after he went to serve his time, I reached out to a local organization, and again, this is, what they do. And I'm telling her the story. I'm telling her the story just like
Mhm.
we reconciled at one point, and this advocate, the first thing that comes out of her mouth, how did you reconcile with someone who tried to kill you? And I looked at her in disbelief because that wasn't what I expected.
Mhm.
And when she said that, I asked her boldly, I said, you tell me how to turn the love switch off.
Mm.
I was labeled as, Tiffany, you're angry. I wasn't angry. I was in a situation that I had never experienced in my life before.
Mhm.
You know, in being angry and that judgment and that stigma being placed on me, I didn't want to talk about it again.
Mhm.
I didn't want to say anything again because I felt like if I defended my truth, if I
Mhm.
defended my experience, how am I labeled as angry?
Right. Right.
How am I labeled as aggressive? I was told I was damaged, and I'm looking like, what?
Mhm.
So I can only imagine what other people, men, women,
Mhm.
go through when they go to organizations or they seek help from people who are lacking the compassion to understand.
And then they judge them. Well, I
They
want to
judge them.
thank you
Sure.
so much for
You're
joining
welcome.
me today. And I am going to ask that you keep pressing forward because that
Okay.
peer to peer support
Mhm.
is so important. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
You're welcome. I thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This conversation was very heavy, but very true and uncut. Please understand, just like Tiffany said, no one has no right to put their hands on you under no circumstances. That's not what this conversation was about today. We wanted to hear a real story, which we did, but please know there are resources out there for you if you are in a domestic violence relationship. I wish you all the best. Peace and love.